Hi friends, before I start I wanted to point out this book. I don't know if you can read the cover. White Supremacy Confronted by Gerald Horne. Gerald Horne is a professor in Texas, and he's done a lot of research into this issue. He has done a lot of research also into the Second Amendment, which I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about in a minute. And this book that I've just shown you, it says this is a book about peoples of African descent separated by thousands of miles who forged common bonds based in no small measure on bruising encounters with white supremacy and imperialism. It is also a book about the role of US imperialism and its handmaiden, anti-communism, in the epochal protests that led to the liberation of Southern Africa, culminating with the first democratic elections in South Africa in 1994. Its thesis is that it is difficult to understand the decolonization of Southern Africa if one ignores contemporaneous events in North America, and indeed the global correlation of forces more generally. That's just the introduction, and it goes on, a lengthy introduction. The bottom part of this book, it says, US imperialism and anti-communism versus the liberation of Southern Africa from Rhodes to Mandela. I think that'll be a very interesting book, and I'm looking forward to having a look through that. So I'm coming to you from my bathroom because it's been very rainy outside today, and in fact I actually I did something this morning while I was on my walk, but it got so windy that it blocked out the some of the audio, so that I really couldn't post it, unfortunately. So I'm going to attempt to reproduce it in some way, what I was talking about this morning on my walk. And I have a new little friend with me in the bathroom here, Eva, who's our new little adopted cat. So he's going to keep me company. Anyway, so I wanted to talk about, I'm not going to reproduce what I talk about in other, when I've mentioned gun violence and white supremacy, but I'm going to briefly touch on some points that I feel are contributing to this, the issue of white male mass shootings. And as you would be aware, there was 3 mass shootings over the weekend in the United States. The major one in El Paso, Texas, and the young white man who did that shooting said he was targeting Mexicans, and that he felt like he did a manifesto, which they all young white men seem to do, these manifestos now, sort of talking about blaming immigrants and all sorts of things like that. It's a sort of a white supremacist, racist manifesto, blaming other groups for one's predicament and also for one's discontent, one's anger, etc. Which is what happens when you have a country that any economy that is suppressed, that is where people are suffering and there's lots of economic inequality, and unfortunately governments like to incite that kind of racial hatred and hatred of minorities when they're actually not serving the people. They want the masses to fight with one another and oppress one another while the oligarchy and the corporations go on their merry way, doing what they want and making more money with no trickle-down effect, and the rest of us are disposable. That's basically where it's at now. There's a few factors, I feel, and you may disagree with me or may not. There's a few factors contributing to mass shootings in the United States. One is, of course, that gun culture is almost like a fetishization of guns in the United States, and that's been fostered by the NRA, which was a big funder of politicians. Not so much in the Democratic Party anymore, hence the Democratic Party tends to vilify the whole gun thing, but nobody actually takes any great measures like Jacinda Ardern did in New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister in New Zealand, when there was the last mass shooting of 50 Muslims in some mosques, she, after that shooting, a few weeks later, banned these automatic weapons from the country. You won't really see that ever happening in the United States. In Australia, when there was the last mass shooting was in 1996, where there was 30 or so people were killed by a young white man. And after that, the government, and it was actually, I think, a more conservative government, actually bought back all the guns in Australia, and they regularly do that. They had another buyback a couple of years ago, and that isn't ever since the 1996 massacre in Port Arthur in Tasmania, the state that I live in. After that, there hasn't been any major mass shootings. There haven't been any mass shootings. We don't have a gun culture over here, although I think the NRA are actually trying to get right-wing politicians from One Nation. They were trying to they're trying to encourage right-wing politicians to try and foster a gun culture and actually try and loosen gun laws here, which would be really awful. And the state government here has also been, actually just before the last election, changed some laws to loosen the gun laws. Anyway, I'm getting off the track here, but so there's that, the fetishization of guns. Even people who are left-leaning will have a reluctance to sort of say anything negative that would suggest that guns need to be outlawed or assault rifles need to be outlawed. I don't know why that is, because there's no other country that comes close to the kind of gun violence that the United States has. And you know that saying, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Well, that's true, people do kill people, but if you had access to, when you get angry, if you can reach for an automatic weapon that's going to mow down a few dozen people, well, then that's what's going to happen. If you only have a knife or something, you're not going to be able to kill that many people. And so yes, people kill people, but if you have access to those weapons, it's going to be there's going to be mass shootings over and over again. So anyway, I don't buy that particular thing, and you often hear people just saying that because they don't want to lose their guns. And I don't know, to me it's a really strange, one could psychoanalyze this love of guns really, but I'm not going to do that. But anyway, so the next thing, of course, is patriarchy. I'm talking about now the contribution to these mass shootings, the various factors. We live in a world which is a patriarchy, and so you don't. That's actually not been very helpful to any of us. I'm not saying a matriarchy is going to be good either, but a patriarchy fosters all the sort of things that really are not beneficial for people, for other animals. I'm vegan, so I don't believe in the exploitation of any animal for any reason. And they're the most vulnerable beings on the planet. And with patriarchy comes along capitalism, which is the exploitation of the planet. And between animal agriculture and industrialization, we have a military-industrial complex, which is a great polluter too. We're on the edge of extinction. So that's what I feel patriarchy has brought to all of us, and the tremendous violence, the might makes right, the domination of others, the rejection, the toxic masculinity that's been fostered and imposed on young men, and is reinforced by the mainstream media, is reinforced by governments, is reinforced in school even, you still see people ridiculing young boys if they cry or if they show too much emotion and all that kind of thing. I feel that's child abuse, and genders are constructions. They're actually constructions that are, it'd be interesting to see what society was like if we didn't have this constant reinforcement of these gender stereotypes. Of trying to make boys not emotional at all and not empathetic and not sensitive and all this kind of thing. If it wasn't this constant thing right from birth, which still goes on despite the fact that, we're told that, society is becoming more open-minded and all that kind of thing. There's definitely a big pushback now on that, particularly since, there's more right-wing governments. They don't want boys to become more sensitive and more empathetic and more caring, because they need these males to join their military and fight their imperialist wars. They need men that don't have empathy to do that. They need men who don't have caring about the environment. So patriarchy has not been helpful at all. And these gender stereotypes that are destructive, not only to the men, but to women who end up the recipients of violence, whether it be rape or domestic violence. It's a really, really unfortunate thing. And sadly, I think we're just going to trip along with these constructed gender stereotypes that are abusive and not helpful to anybody. We're going to keep trucking along with them until the end, sadly. And that's helped bring about not only that feeds into the white supremacy and and the domination, and it feeds into the epidemic levels of violence towards women today. Anyway, so patriarchy has been such a disaster for human beings on the planet, for non-human beings on the planet, and for the planet. And I don't see that changing anytime soon, sadly. The reinforcing of these binary roles and the pushback to any suggestion that they might be, even though there's many studies now that have revealed that the gender stereotypes for men in particular are incredibly destructive and abusive towards men and towards other people. But this hanging on to these constructions and the vilification of anybody who suggests that maybe we need to reevaluate all of this, and that there are more than just two genders in the world. All the freaking out on that, it's astonishing. Anyway, but I'm not here to talk about that really. So we have white supremacy, we have patriarchy, and then I also want to bring up the idea that sorry, I have a little cat staring at me right at the moment. He's just sitting there looking at me. Hi, Nandi. So if you've ever seen or ever been in a family, for example, who tells everybody how great everything's going in the family and how happy everybody is and how wonderful everything is going, and you're in that family and you know that it actually isn't going well. But you think, well, it should be going well because everybody else is doing well, apparently. That's what the parents are telling everybody. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Eventually, if you've grown up in a family like that where they're telling everybody how great everything is going and you're in a bad way, you're probably going to suffer depression and all sorts of things. Well, that's kind of what is happening, and resentment, and that's probably what's happening to people in the United States that keep being told by these governments how well everything is going. That the economy is doing great and everything, and yet everything that most people in the United States, for example, are really, really struggling financially. And of course, with financial stress comes all sorts of other anxieties and depression. And there's a lot of people suiciding now in the United States, 40,000 plus, I think, a year. And there's people suffering from the opioid crisis there, and it's so much easier to overdose and kill yourself, a slow suicide, when you have access to very potent opioids. And I'm not going to get into the Sackler family and Purdue and all of that. And how they knew that OxyContin and various drugs were incredibly addictive, and they allowed those to be spread out into communities that are poor and suffering. And now lots of people are overdosing every week. I think it's 100 every day or something like that. It's some crazy amount of people every day are overdosing on these pills, and it's very, very sad. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. But, the government is like that family I described that keeps telling everybody how great everybody's doing, how the economy, you hear Donald Trump doing this all the time, how wonderful everything is, and yet the experience of most people, except for the 1%, is that it's not doing great, and things aren't good, and they're really struggling. And, the 1% is doing fine, thanks very much. In fact, they own more wealth than most of the population in the United States. So there's a very small few people with a lot of concentrated power. And you only have to see the Democratic candidates like Buttigieg, who has 22 billionaires backing him, that kind of thing. There are billionaires backing all those people except for Bernie Sanders. Anyway, so I'm getting sidetracked again. But anyhow, so the economy is really in reality not doing well, and yet it could be doing well if these oligarchs in power actually utilize the economy the way they're supposed to, meaning that if we understood the operational reality of a sovereign economy, we would realize that it's a currency issuer, and that the government can afford free healthcare, eliminate student debt, it can afford free education, it can fix infrastructure, it can do a whole lot of things. It could help those people on the border, and all that sort of thing. There's so many things a sovereign economy can do. The only constraints are resources, and so the oligarchy, the people in power, are serving corporate interests, and they're serving the military-industrial complex, but then they're not serving the public purpose, which is what the government is supposed to do. They're supposed to be public servants who serve us, the public, and they're supposed to use the sovereign economy for that purpose, but they don't. So everybody, most people are suffering except for the small 1%, and it's happening here too, where no matter what major party is in power, corporations get social welfare for corporations and rugged individualism for the rest of us, kind of thing. It's not as bad as the US, but eventually it could end up like that. That's how that's going. And the United States, it's definitely like that. Even though the sovereign economy could afford all those things, and I invite you to learn MMT, the hashtag learn MMT, and look up Dr. Stephanie Kelton, who is the economic advisor for Bernie Sanders in 2016 and now 2020, and she's a proponent of MMT, which, as I said, is simply a description of the operational reality of a sovereign economy. Stephanie Kelton explains the federal job guarantee, problems with a universal basic income. That's a neoliberal scam, a universal basic income, so never fall for that. She talks about the debt and how there's this whole fear-mongering about the debt, and how there's how federal taxes do not fund spending. She's actually really, really great at explaining how a sovereign economy works, and we need to understand that so we can hold politicians' feet to the fire when they say, oh, we can't afford free healthcare, when they say we can't afford to eliminate student debt and all that sort of thing. They're lying, basically. They're lying, and it has nothing to do with taxing anybody. Taxes are important, but they're not really, they're not important for the reasons we think they are. I invite you to please look up MMT and find out what they're not doing with the sovereign economy. And what they are doing with the sovereign economy is just never-ending money for Israel, because Israel is part of their proxy wars, their foreign policy overseas, and also the military-industrial complex, the weapons industry, get plenty of money for their, for these endless wars, because capitalism is inextricably linked to imperialism. It's like capitalism to the nth degree imperialism, and that's why we have now about 12 imperialist wars happening. And the CIA is meddling all over the place. In Venezuela, they're trying to overthrow Venezuela for oil and for because Venezuela has one of the world's largest reserves of oil. And Iran has the fourth largest reserves of oil. And there's different reasons for why they're wanting to invade Iran, but and there's more than one reason why they want to invade Venezuela. But that's what's ongoing, this constant imperialism and warmongering. So anyway, that's white supremacy too. These white supremacist imperialist wars. So, and nobody complains. You'll never hear the Democratic Party complaining about any of the wars. They applaud the wars. They applaud Trump when he wants to go to war with a country. So they're totally on board with these white supremacist imperialist wars overseas. They have no problem with gun violence overseas. They have no problem at all with killing brown and black people overseas. No problem. So all this wringing of hands about how awful these mass shootings are is just complete and utter hypocrisy from the U.S. Democratic Party and from anybody who happens to speak out about it in the GOP. So, because there's tremendous violence, gun violence overseas in these imperialist wars everywhere, in Iraq, Afghanistan, and in Yemen, where the U.S. is involved. or has been involved. I think they supposedly pulling out of that, but they've been involved for the last few years now, and there's still one child every 10 minutes dying of starvation and disease because of the US-backed Saudi Arabia genocide in Yemen. 40,000 Venezuelans have died since 2017 because of Trump's economic sanctions in Venezuela. And yet they're claiming they care about the population of Venezuela. It's just white supremacy everywhere. The West has got a lot to answer for, a lot of suffering and killing. Anyway, so I'm off the track here, but the economy is something that is, I think, it's not working for most people. And so these young white men, these are the various factors that feed into these mass shootings. They're told by the Trump administration that, you know, these immigrants are taking their jobs, these migrants are taking their jobs. And so they already have those seeds of racism there, or more than seeds. And so they go with that. You know, they don't look at the government as not utilizing the sovereign economy. They just decide, let's blame whatever group the government tells us we should be blaming. And then there's violence towards those groups. So, and if it's not, you know, if it's not migrants, like that white supremacist young man, he said he was targeting Mexicans in that El Paso Walmart. It's very easy to manipulate people who already have been propagandized about America, that America is the best country in the world, and that and sort of basically white people are great, and we can do what we want, and we can go around the world dominating whatever country we want, and if they don't submit, then we invade them, and so forth. You know, unfortunately, there's a lot of US citizens who have been highly propagandized, and they totally, it's almost in their DNA, this American exceptionalism. I remember when I was on a bus many years ago in 1983, I was traveling on a bus just out in Los Angeles, and this guy said to me, so do you have washing machines in Australia? I mean, I don't know what he thinks we did here. I mean, this is a while ago now, but I just sort of thought, wow, you know, like, don't you get any other information about your other countries here? We don't, you know, stamp on our washing like we're stamping on grapes or anything. But anyway, I'm digressing. So anyway, this American exceptionalism has been a real problem, and it's causing lots of problems for other countries, other people. So you know, we have patriarchy, we have and I haven't gotten to the Second Amendment either. So the Second Amendment, and Gerald Horne, this author of this book I just showed you earlier, he talks about how the Second Amendment was designed as the white militia, the small bands of white militia basically had guns so that they could put down any uprising black slaves and also kill indigenous people. That's mainly what the Second Amendment was about. You'll get people going, oh, it's so that we have this guaranteed right to have, you know, guns. You know, it's part of our Constitution. But there's white supremacist reasons for. That's why it was created, so that you could put down any uprising slaves and you could kill indigenous people. So, you know, I mean, George Washington, he used to resell the land that had been stolen from indigenous people. And Thomas Jefferson had a slave whom he raped, and he had 5 children with her. There's all the founding fathers, I believe, were you know, sort of quite a few of them had slaves. So, you know, the whole beginnings of that country was founded on that sort of white supremacy and sort of racism. And so anyway, the Second Amendment, that's what that was for, to put down uprising black slaves and to kill indigenous people. You'll get people will be defending the Second Amendment, oh, you know, that's a sacred thing and stuff like that, but they won't acknowledge that aspect, and that's really unfortunate. So that's another part of it, that feeds into the whole, that contributes to this, the white supremacist mass shootings, is the racist beginnings of the country and how that's continued on. I mean, the KKK, eventually turned into militarized police. And, you get 3 black people being killed every day in a sort of a lynching. They're just executed. And the police get away with it. I mean, it's just ongoing sort of KKK type activities, but it's all done in a sort of like this, it's all with the approval of the state, because most of these policemen do not get prosecuted for killing unarmed black people who have done nothing. They're either running away or they've just done nothing, basically. 3 a day, and they just get away with it unless your name's Muhammad and you're black, which is one of the policemen's name was Muhammad, and he was black, and he killed a white Australian woman, and he went away for 12 years. So the KKK was very healthy in the early part of the 20th century, and, there's just been this thread of very strong structural racism in the United States. And of course, doesn't matter what major party is in office. Bill Clinton brought in bills for mass incarceration. He brought in NAFTA, which destroyed the economy of Mexico, and that's why so many people are fleeing. The constant meddling in Latin America by the CIA and the U.S. empire has caused terrible problems, and that's where a lot of migrants are coming from as well. And yet there'll be no context in the mainstream media about that issue. There's no mention of any U.S. meddling, any U.S. imperialism in those countries. And so it all looks like the people in those countries can't look after themselves. They are incompetent. Their governments are incompetent. They're run by dictators. They make out all of these things that everybody in these countries are just lesser, really, and that they all have dictators. They don't have real leaders. The irony is that the US government supports 73% of the dictators in the world. That's something you don't hear either. And you won't hear in the mainstream media, because the mainstream media is just really an arm of the national security state at this point, and that includes social media, Google, Facebook, Twitter. They're all just arms of the military-industrial complex, the national security state, the surveillance state, and that's the sad state of affairs. We don't have any real fourth estate in the United States. There's a few independent journalists, and they're really great, but there is no functioning fourth estate, and it's the same here in Australia. It's even worse here in Australia. And we are just a vassal of the United States. We just do whatever they want us to do, basically. Anyway, so there's the Second Amendment feeds into that, the white supremacist theme in the Second Amendment, why it was created. And so if society is struggling financially, there's going to be a lot of depression, and this is where psychology falls down to me, where psychologists miss out. You can't have a healthy society if everything it's all set up for you to fail in a way, and that it's all set up for certain members, a small number of people to do very, very well financially. It's guaranteed that you're going to have a lot of depression, which is increasing all over the world, and neoliberalism has brought in a lot of economic problems for people. The fact that governments do not utilize the sovereign economy as they should, and they've been, through neoliberalism, have been taking away various social programs that are essential for health and well-being. Institutionalized unemployment has created a lot of economic hardship for families, even though a federal job guarantee could fix that. But you'll never hear anybody sort of mentioning that, really, except, say, Bernie Sanders and Stephanie Kelton, his economic advisor. So even the Green Party don't understand the operational reality of a sovereign economy in the United States. They don't, and they don't want to. So basically, I fear I'm not a fan of Bernie Sanders, because I think his foreign policy is very lacking, and he goes back and forth on different things. He was a Russiagator for a while, and then he wasn't, and he was signing letters about to the UN saying, please stop the bias against Israel, and then the next thing he's supporting Palestinians. I mean, he's all over the place like a dog's breakfast as far as I'm concerned when it comes to foreign policy issues. But he is very good on domestic policy issues, and he has a good economic advisor. So Bernie Sanders could actually, if he got in and they allowed him to do what he wants to do, it could revolutionize the economy and institute a federal job guarantee, eliminate student debt. All these things can be done in a sovereign economy. They absolutely can. And it's not about taxing people. Sadly, Bernie Sanders seems to be afraid to actually say what a sovereign economy is. He's using the old myths that federal taxes fund spending. And I think it's because he thinks people are going to think he's crazy for stating how the economy actually works. So he's using those old myths of federal taxes funding spending to support his economic plan. I wish he'd just be honest. He should have started back in in 2017, he should have started back then talking about how a sovereign economy really works, so that he could condition people to how it really works, so he could just talk very frankly about how free healthcare can be instituted without taxing anybody, basically. Taxes are important, but not for the reasons we think they are. And a household budget is not the same as a government budget. He could have been doing all of that. He could have been talking about this for years but he didn't. Anyway, that's beside the point. But if Bernie Sanders doesn't get in, which I imagine he will not, because the Democratic Party won't let anybody who has any real progressive ideas, they won't let them get anywhere near the Democratic nomination. I mean, through a miracle, he might get in, and if he doesn't, I think that'll be the end of it, basically, because there is no other candidate really who is talking about domestic policy in that way. Like Bernie Sanders is, and I'm talking about really understanding what a sovereign economy is and how to use it. I'm getting off the point, but all of this mismanaging of the economy and the terrible stresses that it puts on people is also creating, this, and then the government telling people, like the Trump administration telling people it's all migrants' fault that you're struggling and you can't find a job, and yada, 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 yada. That all feeds into these mass shootings. So all those different elements coming together is just a perfect combination for tremendous violence, and that's not going to get any better, because I fear that Donald Trump is going to get in again in 2020. I say that because the US Democratic Party have been talking nonsense about Russiagate now for 2 years. So is the mainstream media. Donald Trump has a lot of problems, but being a Manchurian candidate of Putin is not one of them. And sadly, Donald Trump actually has some points about complaining about the mainstream media, because they really have been just pointing to something where there is none. There's no there, basically. He has lots of problems. I mean, look at Deutsche Bank and his son-in-law Jared Kushner, who is the Deutsche Bank has been part of money laundering, and Jared Kushner's like Deutsche Bank is something that Donald Trump doesn't want them to investigate. There's a whole lot of things Donald Trump has done and is doing that are incredibly problematic, and the Democratic Party just ignores that and makes up something which was all started to hide Hillary Clinton's botched up campaign and the DNC server, which was it wasn't hacked by Russia. It was a leak from within the DNC and possibly Seth Rich, who did that. And so it wasn't a hack from Russia, it was a leak. And the NSA could find that out in a New York Minute, as William Binney said, when William Binney is an NSA whistleblower. But it sort of started to happen there, and they've been trying to pretend like it's this whole Russiagate thing. A lot of that started through that 2016 occurrence of the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Podesta emails. Why am I talking about that? Anyway, I've lost my train of thought. Anyhow, the reason I was talking about that is because Donald Trump has reasons to be angry about that whole Russiagate thing. And there's so many things wrong with him, but that is just, and so that's why I think that Donald Trump is going to win in 2020, because he is going to keep throwing that in their faces, and of course they'll probably pick Kamala Harris. They'll ignore Bernie Sanders and just pick whoever the hell they want, the DNC, and Kamala Harris won't get anywhere. If they pick Joe Biden, won't get anywhere either. So I envisage, sadly, that Donald Trump is going to win in 2020. And if he does, he's going to see that as a mandate, and he'll probably invade Iran shortly after that. They'll probably have some sort of significant 9/11 type event which will lead to the invasion of Iran, and it won't be caused by Iran. It'll be something that is caused by the national security state wanting to start a war with Iran and needing some 9/11 event to do so. That's probably what will happen, I reckon, after Donald Trump wins in 2020. And it'll just be, he'll probably clamp down even further on the press. I think it'll be really starting to escalate into a real American fascism, which it already is going towards anyway. And it started before Donald Trump. It's been, Obama put in that the NDAA was continued on by Obama, and he was sued by Chris Hedges over a part of the NDAA, which was National Defense Authorization Act, where you could arrest any U.S. citizen and keep them detained indefinitely without counsel, and you can even assassinate U.S. citizens, and that's all legal under the NDAA. And all these people who, go on about how you need guns so you can overthrow the government when they get out of hand. Well, where were these people when the NDAA has put that into the bill, where you can actually assassinate U.S. citizens legally and you can keep them detained without counsel indefinitely? Where were all these people that are always going on about, I need my guns so I can overthrow the government if they get out of hand? This is what I mean, that kind of feeble excuse that people use to keep all these guns in circulation. And there's 400 million guns. I think there's way more guns now than there are people who live in the U.S. for every person. I think there's 400 million guns now. It's insane. Also, lastly, something that is not thought about by most people is that when you have an ongoing exploitation of non-human animals, and by 1 to 3 trillion non-human animals, sentient beings, every year are tortured and killed for trivial reasons and mostly palate pleasure. When you're oppressing a vulnerable group like non-human animals, who are 99.99% of the planet's population, and you're doing that for mostly trivial reasons of palate pleasure, and that is also destroying the planet. And I've shown you those memes before about the tremendous violence that animal agriculture puts on the environment. It's one of the major drivers of the climate crisis. When we think it's okay to dominate and exploit and kill en masse, day after day, there's like 200 million plus, that's just land animals, every single day are tortured and killed for these trivial reasons. And that violence is going on all the time in the world. How can we not be affected by that? When every moment of every day we're participating in this violence just by consuming animal products like dairy, meat, eggs, etc., fish and all of that. How can we not be affected by that on some level? And just the fact that we continue on, and even those otherwise intelligent people, you put that to them about, exploiting the vulnerable and the incredible carnage and how it's completely unnecessary because we don't need animal products at all to survive. We can easily meet all our nutrition requirements from plants and other non-animal sources. So the only reason all this tremendous violence to other animals and to the planet and also to our bodies, because those products don't belong in our bodies and we're dying by the millions as a direct result of the consumption of animal products and the amounts that we eat them. All of that violence, how can that not affect us on some level and inform in some ways on some unconscious level how we treat other human beings and all of that, this acceptable violence that we continue to participate in? And otherwise intelligent people just ignore all of that because they want those they have those habits, pleasures, and conveniences. It's very sad, and I feel like until we are a vegan planet, we're always going to have, that there's that saying by Tolstoy, where there are slaughterhouses, there will be battlefields. And dairy cows go to slaughterhouses when they're no longer productive. They're calves that are only a few days old, male calves, get taken off to slaughterhouses because they're no benefit to the dairy industry. Male chicks are thrown alive into grinders by the billions every year because they're no benefit to the egg industry. There's constant violence, and I think it's so true what Tolstoy says: where there are slaughterhouses, there will be battlefields. There are other quotes by different people, but that's probably a very poignant quote. So until we stop participating in the tremendous violence by consuming animal products like meat, dairy, eggs, etc., fish and all of that, we are always going to have these dreadful wars against each other, the violence against each other. Because once you stop doing that and you start to see sentient animals as real moral persons, meaning they're not things, they're not property, how can you turn on human beings? If you're valuing the most vulnerable on the planet, that sort of affects everything in life. I'm not saying that all vegans are better people or anything, or that they're not, or some aren't violent. Some actually are quite misanthropist, sadly. But that's not veganism, because humans are animals too. But I'm just saying that all these things affect everything. And you cannot have that kind of violence that's on the planet today of 200 million every single day, plus just land animals, and then the many, many times that in aquatic animals being tortured and killed every single day. How can that not affect all of us even on just some unconscious level, on some psychic level or whatever? So anyway, that's all I wanted to say. There's other contributing factors, but that will do for now. That's my thoughts on it. And until we address all those issues, and we also address our own, Western people, until we also address and confront our own sort of how we're going around and basically with the white supremacist imperialism, and just allowing our governments to do that and not really being anti-war and anti-imperialist. Until we confront that in ourselves and our lack of interest, we're complicit in that. So Western people of all people, we have to look ourselves in the mirror and think about that. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say, so thanks very much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the notifications bell, otherwise you don't receive notifications when I drop a new video. Please leave comments. I always enjoy your comments. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Till next time. Bye for now.